Hi there, how are you? So, in this lesson, what we're going to be looking at is how our economy actually works, okay? And how it is a debt-based economy. Now, I'm sure that you've all heard of something called the national debt, okay? Now, this is an amount of money, national debt. This is an amount of money that the country owes because it's been spending more than it earns. Okay. We also have something called the world debt. Now, the national debt, some countries have more debt than others. Okay, depending on how much they've been spending more than the country's been earning. But the world as a whole has a debt. Okay, and you can look this up, and I'm also going to try and put it down. I'm going to try and embed it further down in this this lesson plan. Okay, the world debt at the minute stands at something around $7 trillion. Now, I don't know how to write 7 trillion. I don't know how many notes that is, but it's a lot of notes. It's a massive amount of notes, and you'll be able to see further down when it's embedded exactly how big this number is. Now, I used to think for a long time that national debt worked this way. I used to think that, for example, the UK needs money. So it borrows, let's say, £1,000. There would never be £1,000, but I'm just going to say that for an example. Would borrow that £1,000 from the US. Okay, but of course, the US now is £1,000 down. So they would then borrow £1,000 from China, let's say. And then China is now £1,000 down, so China then borrows £1,000 from the UK. And the national debt was just one country owing another country money. And I thought that was the way for a long time. And it wasn't until I actually sort of thought, well, hang on a minute, if the China owes the UK and the UK owes the US and the US uses China, if all the countries are indebted to each other, then national debt can just be cancelled out. Because if I owe you £100 and you owe me £100, well, then we just cancel the debt out. There's no need for me to give you £100 for then you to give me the £100 back, right? That makes sense, okay? So for a long, long time, I couldn't get my head round national debt. I couldn't understand who we owed the money to as a nation. That meant that it maintains itself. Why does the debt maintain itself? And it wasn't until I started investigating our monetary system and realized that our monetary system itself is a debt-based monetary system. Debt-based monetary system. Now, a lot of what I do in these videos is I'm trying to get you in a bad mood, right? And I know that's not like what most people try to do with others. They try to make them like them, but I actually don't care if you like me or not. Okay, I have to communicate this to you because it's important. And if it makes you angry, then actually I like that, because once you get angry, it means you're going to want to find a solution, which is what I want to get you to the point where you look at our economic system and you say, that's disgusting. That's absolutely disgusting. So the debt-based monetary system, we've already established that our banks are private banks. Private, international, central banks. Okay. Now, I've also talked about how prior to 1911, I think it was, when the Federal Reserve took over the issuing of money in the United States, up until that point, the printing of money was left up to the government, and the government was in public hands, so money was public. And that's why we never had, before the Federal Reserve, such problems with inflation or price rises. You know, the economy was stable for such a long time because the money and the printing of money was in public hands, okay? And more money was only printed as and when the population grew, so that we needed more money in the system to be able to spread out between the people, as we've talked about in previous videos, okay? Now, as soon as the private international central banks took over, because the Federal Reserve System in the US is now copied the world over, all national banks now work in the same way. And if you go onto the Federal Reserve website and you read the information about the Federal Reserve, you realize that the Federal Reserve is actually a separate entity to the government. It's a separate body, and it's not responsible to the government either. So the Federal Reserve can make its own decisions about when to print money, how much money to print, and who to give it to, according to their own rules. It doesn't have to be approved by Congress, okay? They do tell Congress what they're doing, but if Congress says, we don't want you to do that, the Federal Reserve can say, well, that's not your issue. We're telling you what we're doing. We're not asking you permission. We're telling you what we're doing, okay? That means then, now, first things first, if the government isn't in charge of printing its own money, okay, where does the government get its money from when it needs money? Well, there's only one place it can get it from, and that's the private international central bank. So, what the government does is the government says, I need money. Government needs money. And let's say it wants £1 million. And this works in the UK with the Bank of England, just like it works in the Federal Reserve in the US. So all modern banking systems work the same way. So the private international central bank says to the government, okay, we will give you the £1 million that you want, but you will issue in return government bonds. Okay? So the private international bank says, of course, yeah, we'll print you the money, no problem at all. There you go, it's £1 million. But in return, as the government, you must give us £1 million worth of government bonds. Sounds like a fair trade, doesn't it? You know, I'm giving you something, you give me something, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. The problem with that is that what that means is that while ever the International Central Bank has government bonds in its possession, the only way the government can get those bonds back is by returning the £1 million to the central bank. Okay? Plus interest, of course, because it's a private central bank. The government has to pay the money back with interest. You see? You see where we're going with this now? So even if the government manages to get the £1 million back to the central bank, which it never does, the International Central Bank now owns £1 million worth of the government. You see? Now you see why the central bank doesn't have to respond to the government, because the central bank owns the government. Now there you've got £1 million contributed to the international debt. You see? Now you see the international debt, it's not because country owes country, it's because countries owe the central banking system. Now, the thing gets worse, because the central bank don't give the money to the government, because the banking system only deals with the banking system. So what the private international banking association do is they give that money to small private banks. So we've got Lloyds, TSB, Santander, another bank, okay? So what the central bank does is it gives a percentage of that £1,000,000 to the banks. Now what happens? The banks loan the money at interest to the people. So here we are, people. So what do the banks do now? They give out cheap loans to the people at 3% interest, 4% interest, 5% interest. Okay? They give out cheap loans to the people. Why? Because they've got a massive surplus. They've got £1,000,000 to give out now, the banks. They've got £1,000,000 that the International Central Bank have given them and said, lend it to the people, lend it out to the people. So we go and buy a house, we go and buy a car, we go and buy a boat. You buy whatever you want, and then you have to give the money back to the bank plus interest, and you also pay taxes back to the government. So what happens is, in essence, the private central bank gives the money to the smaller banks who lend it out to you, and then the government has to claw back through taxes that £1,000,000. Now, I'm sure you can see the flaw in the situation. I'm sure you can see the flaw here in the plan. In that, because the money is not given to the government, it's given to the people spend the money. It's not like the banks say, right, here, I'm going to give you £100,000, but I'm going to give it to you so you can give it to the government, because it's the government's really, it was the government that asked for it. No, the banks lend it out to the people buy stuff, and then the residual taxation is what the government take on the £1,000,000 that they wanted to borrow. Now you can imagine that actually all the government are going to get out of that is about £100,000. I mean, I'm just making these numbers up, but it's to give you the idea that the government wanted £1,000,000 and it only ends up with 100,000 because the rest of it has been lost in debt to the people. So the government asks for more money because it's missing money. It needs more money. So we enter this cycle. This disgusting debt cycle. All because the banks are privately owned. And all the while, the international debt is going up and up and up. The governments are now owned by the central bank. Everything that we have bought with our loaned money also belongs to the central bank. Because really the money was never ours in the first place to be able to use to buy all these things. The money has always belonged to the central bank. You see? Because if the money didn't belong to the central bank, if it was just free for them to print and give out as they saw fit, they wouldn't ask for anything in return for the government. They wouldn't ask for any interest on the money that's loaned to you. They wouldn't need it. It's free. It doesn't cost them anything. Now, this is how our current economic system works. And when you work out the international debt, which is currently around $7 trillion, that works out at something ridiculous like $28,000 per person in the world. So as soon as you're born, you get a debt of 28 grand stuck on your head just for being born. And then what are you told in school? Go out and work and get a good job so you can pay off the debt you owe to the bank just for being born. The fact that our money is in private bankers' hands means that the minute you are born, you are slapped with a piece of the debt, which you then have to spend the rest of your life working to pay off. And that doesn't go down. Every year that you're alive, that goes up with interest. You see, because you might say, oh, 28 grand, it's not that much. I could, if I've got my whole life to pay that off, then I can do it. I suppose what's the problem? At least we've got an economy that goes up every year with interest. More than you can pay, which is why the international debt does not go down. You see, it cannot go down. It's designed only to go up. Now, think this through logically. Think it through logically, okay? If our money, and I say our money because it's not our money, it belongs to the private central banks. If the money that we use to trade with actually belongs to the private central bank, then everything you've ever bought belongs to the private central bank because you've bought it with their money. Do you see how disgusting this system is? Now, we've talked before about interest and about how the bank doesn't print the money for the interest. Okay, so you can never pay them back. Okay, the system is designed so that we can never pay the central bank back because they never put enough money in circulation to be able to pay them back. The system is designed so that every second that passes, they own more and more of the world. And unless we put a stop to it, it's only going to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse until there's nothing left for us but to hand our lives over to the bankers, to be owned completely from the minute we are born to the bankers. Now, I say in the future, that's already happening. We live in a modern day slavery system. We are slaves to the system. We are sold from the minute we are born to the system because of the debt that is slapped upon our heads. But yet the system continues because we allow it to continue, because we continue using that system in the way the system has designed for it to be used, which is not for our benefit, it's for our detriment, and only for the benefit of the private international central banks. They're the winners. They will always be the winners. And while ever the system stays this way, while ever we remain using a debt-based system, it will remain that way. Now, the whole point of this level 1 on the 6 steps to financial freedom is to make you realize that something has to be done about this debt-based system. Because if we allow it to continue, we are dooming our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren to ever-increasing slavery. We are at a point now where we are just on the brink of just falling over into that slavery. Because think about this 7 trillion debt. $7 trillion. That is owed to the private international banks. What happens when they call that loan in? What happens when the international banks say, by the time you get to 8 trillion, look, it's about time you paid us back. It's about time you paid us back. So come on, cough up the money, government. Come on, UK government, cough up the money. Come on, US government, cough up the money. Come on, Australian government, cough up the money. Come on, UK people, cough up the money. US citizens, cough up the money. Australian citizens, cough up the money. Come on, pay us back. How are we going to pay them back? Where's the money? Where is it? You see, the whole system is designed so that all of the money that they issue as debt actually ends up back in their hands as interest. You see? So they issue the money, they remove it from us forcefully, they keep it, and then say, at some point, they say, give it is back, give us the money back. Give us the money back. Let's look at the housing crash in 2008. Why did the housing crash happen in 2008? We are told that our economy is a free market economy. Okay, that's a lie. It's not a free market economy. A free market economy is not manipulated from the outside at all. Okay, what happened in 2008? It was outside manipulation of the housing market. Okay, so you buy this house for £100,000 in the year 2000. Okay. Isn't it funny how houses go up in value? Have you ever wondered why houses go up in value? When you buy a car, you buy a brand new car, okay, you buy a Skoda Fabia, it costs you £12,000. As soon as you drive that new car off the forecourt, it loses its value. It's now no longer worth £12,000. If you try and sell that car the following day, you might get £8,000-10,000 for it. All right. Now, the older your car gets, the less it's worth. You know, you don't buy a car brand new for £12,000 and then sell it 10 years later for £24,000. Doesn't happen. It depreciates in value, right? Now, so why is that different for a house? You know, I mean, the house, the actual materials that the house is made of, you know, don't go up in value. They remain the same. The house gets worn down, just like your car does. So why do houses go up in value the older they get? It doesn't make any sense because nothing else does that. Unless it's a collector's item, obviously, unless it's deemed valuable. You know, things do not go up in value. But yet the housing market does. Now, why does that happen? Or why did it happen to such a great degree? Because the private international banks decided that they would see what happens if they pump money into the system for mortgages. Let's see what happens if we pump money into the system for mortgages. So, we've got all these banks again. Lloyds, TSB, HSBC, Santander, all these banks. So, the private international central banks gave lots and lots of money to the banks, and they said, start issuing mortgages. So that's what the banks did. They started issuing mortgages. Now, these people come to sell this house. They bought it for 100,000. They could sell it for 100,000. Yeah, right. But of course, people are starting to get mortgages. So when they come to sell this house, it's dead easy to get a mortgage. The banks are just giving mortgages away. So you've got 1, 2, 3, you've got 5 people all wanting this house. Now, what happens in economics when there is a huge demand and a small supply? The price goes up. So maybe this person offered £100,000, this person offered 110, this one 120, 130, 150. Who are they going to sell it to? Well, they're going to sell it to this person for £150,000. So the price of the house has been inflated artificially by the international central banks pumping money into the system and telling the banks to sell mortgages. Sell mortgages. So this continued all the way up to 2008, where this house that was originally sold for £100,000 was sold in 2008 for £300,000. But of course, then what happens is that all the money that the international central banks gave out, it eventually runs out. Either because they just injected a limited amount of money in, albeit a huge amount of money was still limited. Or because they said, right, well, that's it. We're not giving you any more. We've got enough mortgages now. right? We've sent out a load of money. Now it's about time that these people started paying us back. So what happened? What happened? There's now no more money. No more money. So the bank said, no more mortgages. No, there's no money for mortgages. We haven't got any money for mortgages. There's no money. So these people now want to sell their house that they bought for £300,000, but there's nobody wanting to buy it. And just like this one, there were millions and millions and millions of other houses, millions, maybe hundreds of thousands of other houses overvalued because of the money that they pumped into the system, because they didn't leave the system by itself. They manipulated it from outside. Now they can't sell their house for 300,000 because there's another 100,000 houses out there, all at the same price. But there's nobody to buy them. There's nobody to buy them because they can't get mortgages. So what does that mean? It means the value of their house drops back to its original value, which was 100,000. But yet these people are left paying a mortgage on £300,000. So even if they manage to sell their house, they're still £200,000 in debt to the bank. Where are they going to get that from? So they can't pay their mortgage. They can't pay their mortgage. So what does the bank do? It's all right, we'll take your house. Bank will take your house. They take all these other houses as well. Loads of people in the street. Nowhere to live. The banks, because they've not got enough stuff already, keep the houses. Why? Because it was intentionally manipulated from the outside. And this is the kind of thing that the International Central Bank does. The stock market. Do you honestly think it's not manipulated? It was manipulated in the same way that caused the crash in the housing market in 2008. It's manipulated. And while ever our economic system is left in private hands, it will always be manipulated by those private hands for their own benefit and our detriment. Always. Now, I hope that's left clear how disgusting our monetary system is. Now, I don't care. You can believe this or not. It makes no difference to me whether you believe it or not. Go do your own research. Go do your own research. Think about things like, how on earth do houses go up in value but nothing else does? Think about it. Find a logical answer as to why these things should happen. Okay? And if you can come up with another reason as to why these things happen that isn't because the private bankers are manipulating our economic system for their own benefit, then share it with me. Let me know. I am open to other opinions. Always am. Always am. But this is the opinion that I've come to. And not just me. Many, 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 many people. All right. So now we've got that sorted out. What we're going to do from now on, or in a few videos' time, is actually look at how we can solve this problem. Because if we don't get the banking system out of the hands of private bankers, we are dooming our children and our grandchildren to slavery forever. Forever. Okay? So I'm sorry if I've depressed you or I've made you angry. Well, I'm not really, because that was the point. I want you to be angry to the point where you want to do something about it. And I'm going to show you what we can do about it. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.